The air in the Galactic Archive was thick with the smell of burning dreams and bureaucratic ineptitude. Desideria squinted through the smoke. Clutching a datapad like it was her last connection to sanity. Just another day at the office, huh, Jorvax, she shouted over the din, as alarms blared like deranged banshees trying their best to out-annoy each other. Jorvax, her alien colleague, with a complexion that resembled a bruised avocado left out in the sun too long, was busy hacking into the central terminal, his 4 nimble fingers dancing across the keys with a speed that belied his love for long, ponderous conversations. If by office you mean fiery hellscape, then yes, Desideria, it is indeed just another day. His voice was dry as the desert winds of his homeworld, which he reminded everyone about every chance he got. Desideria coughed, waving away a particularly thick cloud of smoke that seemed hell-bent on becoming her personal nemesis, who had archives set ablaze by incompetent rebels on their bingo card. Because today's your lucky day, Jorvax didn't look up. I believe that falls under they can't possibly be this stupid, can they? Can't wait to see what they do for an encore. Maybe blow up their own headquarters, Desideria replied, squinting at the flickering holographic displays that were slowly succumbing to the flames. So, while you're playing Data Hero, should I be looking for an exit? Just a moment, if you please. I'm deciphering something that, if I'm not mistaken, could make our day significantly worse. Jorvax's fingers flew faster. Desideria sighed, checking her wrist scanner, which was valiantly trying to warn her with increasingly desperate pings. Worse than today. What's next, Jorvax? Alien invasion. Galactic tax audit. Jorvax finally stepped back, his eyes wide in a way that suggested they'd just hit the jackpot, only the payout was a lifetime supply of despair. Desideria, this isn't just any data, it's encrypted plans. Let me guess, Desideria said, already regretting the words before they left her mouth. Something's brewing that spells bad news for my favorite species. Precisely. Someone's planning to enslave humanity. Desideria rolled her eyes. Great, that's all we need. New chains, same old dance. The heat was getting unbearable, and the fire suppression systems were working about as well as a soggy towel in a thunderstorm. Jorvax, I love a good conspiracy theory as much as the next gal, but let's save the world another day, shall we? Jorvax handed her the datapad, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. Desideria, this is serious. We need to get this information out of here. Right, she said, tucking the datapad under one arm. Let's add unwilling heroes to our resumes then. As they made their way through the chaos, dodging falling debris and frantic coworkers who were 30 seconds away from reenacting every disaster movie ever made, Desideria couldn't help but think about how much simpler her life used to be. You know, back when the most stressful part of her day was remembering her login password. They reached the emergency exit, where a disinterested security drone hovered, lazily scanning ID badges, as if debating whether it was worth the effort. Out of service, my metallic ass, Desideria muttered, kicking the door open with a satisfying crunch. They burst out into the night air, the inferno behind them lighting up the sky like a particularly aggressive fireworks display. Desideria took a deep breath, savoring the lack of smoke in her lungs. I never thought I'd say this, but oxygen has never tasted so good. Jorvax glanced at the datapad. We need to warn the Council before this turns into a full-blown galactic incident. Right, Desideria said, rolling her eyes. Let's just hope they're not too busy with their usual infighting to notice the imminent doom. Jorvax chuckled, a sound that was more a series of clicks than anything resembling human laughter. We live in hope, Desideria, or at least we pretend to. The streets were chaos, citizens running in every direction like headless chickens at a crossroads. Desideria and Jorvax pushed through the crowd, earning a few choice curses and one half-eaten sandwich tossed their way. I love the smell of anarchy in the evening, Desideria quipped, brushing crumbs off her shoulder. Jorvax shook his head. And here I thought humans were known for their resilience. Oh, we are, Desideria replied. We're just also known for our ability to turn any situation into a spectacle of poor decision-making. They ducked into an alley, the datapad feeling heavier with every step. So, any idea who's behind this master plan to put humanity in shackles? No names, just a lot of encrypted chatter. But it's coordinated, that much is clear. Jorvax frowned, the gesture making his already wrinkled face look like a prune contemplating early retirement. Desideria sighed. Well, at least we know one thing for sure. And what's that? We're screwed, she said, a wry smile on her lips as they emerged onto the main thoroughfare, where the distant wail of sirens suggested that someone somewhere was just as bad at their job as the rebels were at theirs. They flagged down a public transport drone that looked like it had seen better days and worse passengers. It hovered reluctantly, its circuits buzzing like an over-caffeinated bee. Destination, it asked in a voice that was one malfunction away from a nervous breakdown. Galactic Council Hall, Jorvax said, sounding about as hopeful as someone betting on a three-legged horse. The drone shuddered, as if considering its options. High alert. Increased fare applies. Desideria rolled her eyes and slapped her ID chip against the sensor. Just get us there before the universe decides to implode, all right. The drone begrudgingly lifted off, weaving through the sky traffic with the grace of a drunken wasp. Desideria and Jorvax sat in silence, the weight of their discovery pressing down like a cosmic joke they weren't in on. You ever get the feeling we're nothing more than pawns in someone else's game? Desideria asked, staring out at the sprawling cityscape that glowed with the light of 1,000 lies. Jorvax nodded, constantly, but then I remember the alternative is being the one playing the game, and I find comfort in my insignificance. Desideria smirked. I guess it beats being the one on the losing side, right? Indeed, Jorvax agreed, his tone as dry as ever, though I suspect we might be there soon enough. The drone landed with a lurch that nearly sent them sprawling. Destination reached. Thank you for choosing unreliable transport services. It buzzed before zipping away like it couldn't leave fast enough. They stood before the imposing edifice of the Galactic Council Hall, its gleaming facade marred by the distant glow of the burning archive. Time to convince a room full of self-important idiots that were worth listening to, Desideria said, squaring her shoulders. Jorvax nodded, his expression unreadable. And if they don't believe us, Desideria grinned. Then we're really screwed. They strode up the steps, ready, or as ready as they'd ever be, to face whatever bureaucracy had in store. As the massive doors swung open, Desideria couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the lion's den, armed with nothing but a datapad and a bad attitude. Inside, the council chamber was a cacophony of voices, each one louder and more self-assured than the last. Desideria spotted a few familiar faces, none of whom she particularly trusted. Desideria, Jorvax, a voice called, belonging to Councillor Threx, who approached with the kind of fake smile that suggested he'd rather be anywhere but here. What brings you here in such a rush? Oh, just the usual, Desideria said, holding up the datapad. World-ending conspiracies, impending doom. You know how it is, Threx's smile faltered. Is this some kind of joke? Jorvax shook his head, his expression grave. I assure you, Councillor, the only jokes here are the ones you call policies. We need to address the council now, Desideria insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. Threx hesitated, then nodded. All right, but this better be worth it. As they followed him into the chamber, Desideria couldn't help but wonder if they were walking into the lion's den, or just another snake pit disguised as one. Either way, they were in it now, with no turning back. The room fell silent as they approached, all eyes on the unlikely duo. Desideria took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Ladies and gentlemen of the council, she began, holding up the datapad like it was a talisman against stupidity, we've got a situation that demands your immediate attention. The councillors leaned forward, curiosity piqued, or maybe just pretending to care. What kind of situation? Councillor Zilek asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. The kind where aliens are planning to enslave the entirety of humanity, Jorvax replied, his tone as dry as ever. The chamber erupted in a chorus of disbelief and derision, the councillors exchanging incredulous looks. Desideria held up a hand, silencing them. I know it sounds far-fetched, but we've got proof. This datapad contains encrypted plans detailing the whole scheme. Zilak raised an eyebrow. And why should we believe you? Desideria sighed, glancing at Jorvax. Because if we're wrong, you've lost nothing but a few minutes of your precious time. But if we're right, well, let's just say you won't get a second chance. A tense silence settled over the chamber, the weight of their words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Threx nodded. Show us what you've got. As Jorvax connected the datapad to the council's holo display, Desideria couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could avert disaster. But deep down, she knew the universe had a twisted sense of humor, and they were probably about to get the punchline. As the encrypted data began to unfurl, she braced herself for whatever came next, aware that the stakes had just been raised, and the game was far from over. The council hall was a classic example of form over function, a grand veneer hiding a hive of incompetence. Desideria could almost hear the collective wheezing of ancient bureaucrats attempting to spin this into an opportunity for more meetings. She and Jorvax navigated the labyrinthine corridors, the datapad feeling like a ticking time bomb in her grip. Remind me again why the hell we're doing this, she muttered, avoiding eye contact with yet another sneering official. Jorvax clicked his response, because apparently someone has to be the adults in the room. Lucky us. Adults us, speak for yourself, Desideria scoffed. I never signed up for this hero nonsense. They made their way to the side exit, intending to slip away before another round of questions could trap them. The hallway was eerily quiet, a quiet that suggested something was brewing. Never trust the silence, she thought. It usually meant someone was sharpening their knives or their tongues. As they stepped outside, the alien moon casting a sickly glow over the chaos below, a voice called out. Desideria, wait. She turned to find Threx hurrying after them, his self-importance trailing like a bad cologne. What now? We've given you the plans. You can handle the rest, right? I'm coming with you, Threx announced, puffing his chest. This is bigger than just a council issue now. Desideria exchanged a glance with Jorvax. You sure about that? We're planning on visiting a place where decorum is as foreign as you are. Threx hesitated, then nodded. I know what's at stake. All right, Desideria shrugged, but don't expect a red carpet. More likely, a red alert. They made their way to the hidden enclave, a place where humanity's most paranoid and resourceful minds congregated. It was the kind of place where every door had a secret knock, and the phrase, trust me, was met with a laugh and a side-eye. The enclave was tucked beneath the ruins of old Earth's once great metropolises, a network of tunnels and bunkers that spoke of bygone paranoia and, ironically, foresight. The entrance was guarded by a sentry who looked like he'd charge extra for a smile. State your business, he grunted, eyeing Threx with suspicion. We've got critical information, Desideria said, flashing the datapad. And a counselor who wishes he was somewhere else, the sentry snorted. Don't we all? Go on through. Inside, Captain Thorne sat at the head of a table cluttered with maps, data sheets, and coffee cups that suggested caffeine addiction was a universal constant. His eyes narrowed as they approached. Desideria, Jorvax. What debacle have you brought to my doorstep this time? The kind that'll make your worst day look like a vacation, Desideria replied, tossing the datapad onto the table. Thorne picked it up with a sigh that suggested he'd seen it all before and was thoroughly unimpressed. And who's this? He nodded at Threx. A counselor, apparently. Don't worry, he won't bite, Jorvax said, his tone dry enough to start a fire. Threx bristled but said nothing, probably wise, considering he was outnumbered by people who took sarcasm as seriously as their morning coffee. Thorne plugged the datapad into a terminal, frowning as the holo display flickered to life. All right, I'm listening. Impress me. Jorvax leaned over the table, pointing at the data streams scrolling past. Coordinated attacks targeting our infrastructure. Encrypted communications linking several alien factions. It's a blueprint for enslavement. Charming, Thorne muttered, rubbing his temples. And you think this is reliable? It's reliable enough that I'd bet your last bottle of whiskey on it, Desideria replied. And probably mine, too. Thorne gave her a long look, then nodded. All right, I'll have my team decrypt and verify. In the meantime, we need to prepare for the worst. The worst being, Threx asked, attempting to regain some semblance of authority. The worst being us becoming footnotes in some alien history book, Thorne snapped. We're talking total occupation, assimilation, and not the fun kind. Threx swallowed hard, realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the stakes were more than just political. Desideria leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. So what's the plan, Captain? Thorne considered, his gaze steely. We mobilize, quietly. We can't let panic spread or they'll have us by the throat before we've even made a move. Mobilize, Threx squeaked, looking paler by the second. Against what? Against whoever's pulling the strings, Thorne said. We've got to be ready to fight fire with fire. Thick, acrid, smothering fire. Desideria couldn't help but grin. Now that's the spirit. I always did like a good bonfire. Jorvax nodded. And what of the council? We can't leave them in the dark. Of course not, Thorne agreed. But we also can't rely on them to do more than squabble and blame each other. We work with what we've got. Threx seemed to shrink into his seat, his bravado evaporating under the heat of reality. Is it really that bad? Worse, Jorvax replied, his tone flat. But look on the bright side. If we fail, it won't matter who was right. Silence fell, the weight of their task settling like a shroud. Desideria broke it with a wry chuckle. Well, if we're going down, at least we're doing it with style. Thorne raised an eyebrow. Style, sure, nothing like a good existential threat to spice up the day-to-day drudgery. Beats paperwork anyway, one of Thorne's aides approached, whispering in the captain's ear. Thorne nodded, turning back to them. We've intercepted new transmissions. More of the same, encrypted. Tighter than a miser's purse. Any chance we can break it? Desideria asked. Jorvax tilted his head, considering. With time, perhaps, but time is the one thing we don't have in abundance. Story of my life, Desideria sighed. All right, what can we do in the meantime? Thorne stood, exuding the kind of authority that suggested he wouldn't bend easily to pressure. We need reconnaissance. Find out who's backing this operation. Follow the money, the influence, the power. Good thing snooping is one of my better skills, Desideria remarked, standing as well. Careful, Threx warned. This isn't just some political backroom deal, it's war. And war, Desideria replied, is something we humans have been perfecting for centuries. Thorne cracked a rare smile. Then get to it. Report back with anything you find. And Desideria, yeah, don't play hero too much. Heroes tend to die young, she saluted mockingly. Yes, sir, I'll leave the heroics to someone else like always. They left the Enclave, the chill of the night, a sharp contrast to the heat of their mission. Desideria and Jorvax moved like shadows through the remains of a city that had once been the heart of an empire. Now it was just bones and echoes. So where to? Jorvax asked, glancing at the datapad that had somehow become both burden and beacon. Back to square one, Desideria replied, a slight edge to her voice. You ever want to quit your day job and become a full-time rebel? Jorvax chuckled, the sound a staccato series of clicks. Every day, but then who'd keep you in line? They headed toward the transport terminal, their steps quick and deliberate. The night was full of secrets, and they intended to uncover every last one. As they approached a public transport hub that had seen better centuries, Desideria paused, taking in the sight of the dilapidated structure. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? She mused. Jorvax glanced at her, curious. Wonder what? How we ended up caretakers of a crumbling civilization, armed with nothing but sarcasm and stubbornness. Makes sense, Jorvax replied. We humans are nothing if not persistent in our folly. The transport drone shambled into view, a relic of a bygone era still serving its purpose, much like them. They boarded, letting the city slide by in a blur of neon and decay. Desideria watched the world move past, her mind racing with plans and contingencies. You think we stand a chance? She asked, almost absently. Jorvax considered before answering. A chance is all we ever have, isn't it? Against entropy, against disaster, against ourselves. She nodded, appreciating the honesty beneath his alien exterior. Then let's make the most of it. Failures never suited me. They arrived at the rendezvous point, an unassuming building tucked between the shadows of taller, more imposing structures. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation and stale coffee, a combination as familiar as it was unwelcome. Desideria and Jorvax slipped in, unnoticed for now, blending into the sea of humanity, desperate, determined, dangerous. They moved toward the back, where a few like-minded individuals huddled over maps and screens, the glow casting harsh shadows on their faces. Hey Des, a voice greeted her, belonging to one of her old contacts, a mercenary by the name of Grix. Heard you were back in town. What's the scoop? Same old, Desideria replied, her tone flippant. Just a little alien conspiracy to keep things lively. Grix gave a low whistle. Figures, never a dull moment with you, huh? Wouldn't have it any other way, she smirked. What have you got for us? Grix motioned to a display screen where encrypted data scrolled faster than most could comprehend, picked up some chatter. Looks like someone's paying a lot to keep things quiet. Any idea who? Jorvax asked, his interest piqued. Not yet, Grix admitted, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that secrets rarely stay buried for long. Good, Desideria nodded. Let's dig them up then. I'm in the mood for some truth. The night stretched on, the room buzzing with activity and tension. Desideria felt the weight of the datapad like an anchor tethering her to duty, but she shrugged it off. There'd be time for rest later, if there was a later to be had. For now, she had a job to do, a world to save, and a sarcastic alien sidekick who, despite everything, she was glad to have at her side, because in the end they might just pull this off, or die trying. Either way, it was going to be one hell of a ride. Jorvax stared intently at the holographic display, its flickering lights casting odd shadows across his alien face. It looked like a festive display gone terribly wrong. He sighed. These encrypted transmissions are tighter than a nun's corset. I've got nothing. Desideria leaned over, peering at the mess of data. So, what's the problem? I thought you were the tech genius. Aren't you supposed to just wave your magic alien fingers and decode this stuff? I'm a hacker, not a miracle worker, Jorvax replied, rubbing his forehead with a sigh. They've used some newfangled encryption that makes our systems look like a toddler's puzzle. Captain Thorne wandered over, his expression caught between annoyance and resignation. Any good news, or should I just start writing our eulogies? Good news, Desideria snorted. In this universe, I think we'd sooner see a pig sprout wings and do the tango. Thorne grunted, turning to Jorvax. What do we need to crack this? A miracle or a temporal anomaly? Jorvax replied dryly. Or a way to bypass their encryption entirely. Desideria snapped her fingers, a spark lighting up her eyes. What about those ancient human algorithms? The ones written back when computers filled entire rooms and people wore bell-bottoms. Jorvax raised an eyebrow. I think you're reaching, Des. Yeah, well, I'm also grasping, hoping, and praying. Get used to it, Desideria said with a smirk. Those old algorithms were simple, sure, but they were unpredictable. Maybe unpredictability is what we need right now. Thorne crossed his arms, pondering. You think those relics could work? Desideria shrugged. Hey, I'm just spitballing here, but sometimes the old ways have a way of surprising us. Besides, can't hurt to try. Worst case scenario, we waste a few hours of our lives, as opposed to the rest of eternity if we fail, Jorvax muttered. Exactly, Desideria said, clapping her hands together. So let's dig up some digital fossils and see if we can shock these alien bastards with some good old-fashioned human ingenuity. Thorn nodded reluctantly. All right, I've got a couple of tech guys who love that retro stuff. Maybe they won't mind cobbling something together. Desideria grinned. Great, let's show them that nostalgia isn't just for hipsters and collectors. Jorvax was already tapping away, calling up old archives and searching for the algorithms Desideria had suggested. The holo display shifted from alien gibberish to text that looked like it belonged in a museum, ASCII art and all. This is what we're relying on, Jorvax said, shaking his head. It's like using a slingshot to stop a warship. Desideria gave him a playful nudge. It's called thinking outside the box, or in this case, outside the galaxy. Thorn turned away, shaking his head. I'll leave you two to your tinkering. Just make sure it doesn't blow us all up. No promises, Desideria called after him. But hey, if it does, at least we won't have to deal with any more mind-numbing bureaucratic meetings. As Thorn stalked off, Grix sidled up to Desideria. So, are we actually betting on ancient tech? You know what they say about relying on history. Yeah, Desideria replied. Those who forget it are doomed to repeat it, but no one ever said what happens if you try to rehash it. Grix chuckled. Fair point. Just let me know if you need any muscle, or sarcasm. I'm pretty good at both. Thanks, Grix, Desideria said. But if this works, I'll buy you a drink. A real one, not that synthetic swill you usually down. Deal, Grix grinned before wandering off to his own devices. Desideria and Jorvax continued sifting through the data, the room around them buzzing with activity as others prepared for whatever chaos lay ahead. The weight of the mission loomed over them like a disapproving parent. Remind me, Jorvax said, not looking up from his datapad. Why do we do this again? Because we're heroes, Desideria replied with mock bravado. Or at least we like to think we are in our heads. Heroes usually end up dead, Jorvax noted, his tone as dry as desert sand. Exactly, that's why we're just playing the part. We're survivors first, heroes second. And if this doesn't work, then we pivot, improvise, and do what humans do best, make up a plan on the fly, Desideria said, crossing her arms. I mean, look at us. We've been winging it since we crawled out of the primordial ooze. Jorvax chuckled softly, a rare sound. I'll give you that. Humans are nothing if not creatively stubborn. Stubbornness is our best feature, Desideria said, turning her attention back to the screen. That and our ability to drink questionable substances. As the Ayers ticked by, both of them poured through code, tweaking and adapting ancient algorithms to fit the situation. They were patching holes in a sinking ship, hoping their efforts would keep them afloat long enough to reach dry land. Eventually, Jorvax leaned back, the display in front of him filled with indecipherable code. I think I've done it. Or at least I've done something. We'll know soon enough. Desideria clapped him on the shoulder. See, piece of cake, or at least a piece of something digestible. They booted up the program, watching as the algorithms began their assault on the alien encryption. The tension in the air was palpable, everyone in the room watching with bated breath as the line of communication flickered on the holo display. After a heart-stopping moment, the encryption began to unravel, the alien characters transforming into readable text. Desideria let out a whoop of triumph. Would you look at that? We did it. Jorvax gave a satisfied nod. Looks like the universe isn't entirely against us after all. Thorn, who had been observing from a distance, stepped forward, his eyes wide with surprise. I'll be damned. You two actually pulled it off. Never underestimate the power of desperation and spite, Desideria said with a grin. Great motivators, those two. With the decoded information at their fingertips, they pored over the details, unraveling the extent of the alien conspiracy. It was worse than they thought, multiple factions, all with their fingers in the pie. Well, ain't this a pleasant surprise, Grix commented, leaning over to get a better look at the data. Looks like we're in deeper than we figured. Yeah, Desideria agreed, but at least we know what we're up against. Jorvax studied the screen, his expression thoughtful. Now the question is, what do we do with this information? Desideria rubbed her hands together, a wicked glint in her eye. We hit them where it hurts. Sabotage, espionage, a little creative chaos, and hope we don't end up as martyrs or cautionary tales, Jorvax added, his voice tinged with grim humor. Exactly, Desideria said, but hey, at least we'll go out with a bang, and isn't that what life's all about? Thorn, who had been listening to their banter, gave a low chuckle. If you two keep this up, you'll have me believing in miracles, just doing our part to keep the universe interesting, Desideria replied, nudging Jorvax playfully. Jorvax rolled his eyes. Somehow, I think the universe was doing just fine without our help. Don't be so sure, Desideria said. We humans have a way of shaking things up. For better or worse, Thorn gave them a nod, his expression softening. Whatever happens next, just know that you've done more than expected, more than I could have asked. Don't get sappy on us, Captain, Desideria teased. There's still a lot of work to do. Just acknowledging the facts, Thorn replied, turning to address the rest of the team. All right, listen up, we've got a playbook now. Let's get to work. The room erupted into organized chaos as everyone got back to their tasks, their determination a palpable force in the air. Desideria felt a flicker of hope amid the grim reality, just enough to keep her moving forward. Jorvax glanced at her, a rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Looks like we're in for one hell of a ride. Desideria returned the smile, a glint of mischief in her eyes. Wouldn't have it any other way, Jorvax. Let's give them a show they'll never forget. Together, they dove back into the fray, ready to face whatever the universe decided to throw at them next. After all, they were human, and humans never backed down from a challenge. Not when there was a fight to be fought, a battle to be won, and a future to seize, one sarcastic step at a time. The first inkling that things were about to go pear-shaped came when Desideria's wrist scanner pinged with an urgency that could only mean one of two things: imminent attack, or she'd forgotten her mother's birthday again. As it turned out, the aliens weren't sending her a belated card. Jorvax, get your tentacles in gear. You've got company, and they're not here to sell us Girl Scout cookies, she barked, scrambling over a pile of outdated tech that looked more like a scrapyard than a refuge. Jorvax, already elbow-deep in wires and circuits that once might have belonged to a microwave, looked up with the weary expression of someone who's been asked to fix the world with bubble gum and good intentions. I'll get right on that after I solve world hunger, Des. Priorities, you know. Captain Thorne stomped over, his face a mask of annoyance mixed with the kind of grim determination usually reserved for people walking into a bureaucratic meeting. We need to move now. This place is about to be hotter than a solar flare on a bad day. Music to my ears, Captain. Nothing like a good evacuation to start the afternoon, Desideria replied, already stuffing datapads and loose bits of tech into a bag. What's the plan? Or are we winging it and calling it improvisation again? Winging it is an art form, not a haphazard act, Thorne replied with a tight smile. Same difference. Jorvax stood, patching the last of the data they'd managed to decrypt to his own device. Got it. Partial plans, though, and if these timelines are right, we're the stars of a very bleak show. Desideria peeked over his shoulder, her eyes narrowing. Timeline of an enslavement operation. I knew these aliens were up to no good, but talk about overachievers. Guess they didn't get the memo on subtlety, Thorne added dryly. Let's move before they decide to come in and critique our interior decorating skills. They rushed through the warren of the Enclave, the supposed safe haven now a ticking time bomb. The dimly lit corridors were filled with the frenetic energy of people trying to save their own hides, a symphony of panic and desperation. Hey, Desideria, Grix called out, falling into step beside them. Heard we're about to have some uninvited guests. Should I bake a cake, or are we skipping straight to the farewell speeches? Save the speeches, Grix. Let's focus on not becoming laser-fried toast, Desideria replied, half jogging, half tripping over a stray cable. Practical as ever, Grix quipped, his grin flashing even in the low light. You always know how to take the fun out of impending doom. The entrance to the Enclave loomed ahead, an unassuming hatch hidden beneath layers of old Earth's forgotten debris. Desideria hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the only place that had felt like home, albeit a dysfunctional, jury-rigged one. Don't get sappy now, Jorvax said, nudging her shoulder. We can always come back and redecorate once the alien threat's handled. Maybe add some plants, bring in a feng shui specialist. Desideria smirked, shaking off the sentiment. Right, let's not make this a goodbye then. Just a see you later. Thorne punched the hatch release, and the cold air of the outside world rushed in, a stark contrast to the stale heat of the Enclave. Move it, people. I'd rather not be here when the aliens decide to drop by for tea. They spilled out into the maze of ruins, the remnants of human civilization standing as silent, thorny sentinels. The landscape was a testament to humankind's tenacity, or maybe just a stubborn refusal to clean up after themselves. Where's the extraction point? Desideria asked, scanning the horizon for any sign of their ride out of this mess. Coordinates say about a click north, Thorne replied, consulting his wrist scanner. Assuming, of course, the pilot hasn't decided to take a smoke break. Just our luck, Jorvax muttered, his steps crunching against the debris-strewn ground. An alien invasion and the ships probably parked in a no-fly zone. They trekked through the ruins, the ever-present threat of pursuit looming over them like a dark cloud. Desideria kept one eye on the horizon, the other on her crewmates, the weight of leadership a constant, uncomfortable presence. Tell me, Thorne, she said, keeping her voice low, you ever think about chucking it all and heading for some quiet corner of the galaxy? Maybe open a bar, serve drinks with little umbrellas in them, more often than I'd care to admit, Thorne grunted. But then I remember the universe would probably find a way to screw that up too. Maybe blow up the star system or something. Always the optimist, Grix commented, his tone light despite their precarious situation. Realism, not optimism, Thorne corrected. Maybe with a drizzle of pessimism for taste. They reached a clearing, the silhouette of their extraction ship just visible through the haze of smoke and dust. Relief warred with urgency as they sprinted for safety, every step a reminder of the danger snapping at their heels. Hey look, Jorvax pointed at the sky where a fleet of alien ships hovered, casting shadows that seemed to drain the color from the earth. They're really rolling out the welcome mat for us. Nice of them, Desideria panted, pushing herself to run faster. Too bad I left my party hat back at the Enclave. They reached the ship, the ramp lowering with a mechanical whir that was almost drowned out by the growing roar of the alien vessels. Desideria stumbled aboard, her lungs burning and her heart pounding with the thrill of survival. Strap in and hold on, Thorn ordered as he took the controls. This is gonna be a bumpy ride. The ship lurched upward, the ground dropping away beneath them as they shot into the sky. Desideria watched the ruins shrink to nothing, just as the first alien craft descended with all the subtlety of a hammer to the face. Timing couldn't be better, she muttered, strapping herself into a seat and gripping the armrests. I love a good chase scene in the morning. Complaining about my piloting skills already, Thorn asked over the din, his hands a blur on the controls. Wouldn't dream of it, Captain. Your driving's improved. Mostly, she shot back. With the ship shaking and groaning like it was held together by duct tape and hope, they shot into the atmosphere, the stars stretching before them like an endless ocean of possibilities and potential disasters. Jorvax leaned back, letting out a breath that sounded suspiciously like relief. Well, that was fun. Let's never do it again, seconded. Desideria agreed, her heart still beating a frantic rhythm in her chest. But at least we've got something to work with now, she added, gesturing to the datapad clutched in her hands. Yeah, a whole lot of we're screwed, Grix commented, peering over her shoulder at the decrypted data. But at least we're not flying blind, Thorn snorted. Flying blind would be an improvement. We're flying with our eyes shut and our heads in a blender, Desideria nodded, pulling up the information they had managed to salvage. Partial plans, timelines, names. Enough to keep us busy and hopefully one step ahead of our friends with the bad temperament. Jorvax frowned, studying the screen. The enslavement operation is bigger than we thought. Multiple factions all working towards the same endgame. Enslavement on a galactic scale, Thorn said, shaking his head. That's ambitious even for them. But why now? Because they think they can get away with it, Desideria replied, her voice hard. And maybe they're right, but I'll be damned if we let them without a fight. Grix leaned back, a grin splitting his face. You know, I kind of enjoy this part. The planning, the scheming, it's like a really high-stakes game of chess. Except the pieces are us, the board is the universe, and the stakes are everything, Jorvax pointed out. Desideria smirked. Sounds like a typical Tuesday. Thorn adjusted the ship's course, the stars blurring past the viewport. So what's the plan? Or are we back to improvising? Improvisation with a side of strategy, Desideria said, her mind already spinning with possibilities. We dig into these plans, find the cracks, and exploit them. Sabotage, espionage, maybe a little light theft, Jorvax added. Sounds like a party. Exactly, Desideria replied, her eyes gleaming with determination. We hit them where it hurts, and we keep hitting until they get the message. And what message is that? Thorn asked, his expression unreadable. That we're not giving up without a fight, Desideria said, her voice firm. That humanity might be down, but we're not out. Not yet. Grix chuckled, his laughter echoing in the cramped space of the ship. You know, Des, you've got a real way with words. Yeah, well, let's hope they translate well into action, she replied, settling back in her seat as the ship sped through the void. The future loomed uncertain and dangerous, but Desideria felt a spark of hope amid the darkness. They had the beginnings of a plan, a purpose, and enough sarcasm to keep their spirits up on the ride ahead. Jorvax studied the stars with a thoughtful gaze. You know, humans are a strange bunch. Always fighting, always struggling. Desideria smiled, her eyes fixed on the distant glow of an unknown star. And that's what makes us dangerous, Jorvax. We never know when to quit. The ship soared onward, a small defiant speck against the vast, indifferent universe. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. Desideria wiped the sweat off her brow as she surveyed the bleak landscape of the galactic outpost. It looked like the universe's idea of a cosmic landfill, a desolate stretch of nothing punctuated by the occasional piece of junk that had somehow managed to get there before them. If this was humanity's last hope, then hope had a hell of a sense of humor. Well, this is cozy, Desideria muttered, kicking a rusted piece of metal that could have been an ancient toaster or an alien's idea of modern art. A bit of feng shui, and it'll feel like home, Jorvax said, trying to sound optimistic but managing, instead to sound like a used datapad salesman on his last chance. The poor alien kept fidgeting with his wrist scanner, probably hoping it would lead them to something less depressing than their current situation. Desideria sighed. Yeah, if home was where the heart is and the heart had a serious case of rot. Jorvax attempted a grin, but it came out more like a grimace. They both knew the odds were stacked against them, but Jorvax's recent decision to stick around meant the universe might not be entirely devoid of surprises. He was an enigma, part ally, part potential liability, and mostly just a pain in her neck, but he was their pain now. So, where's Thorn? Jorvax asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them like a rubber band about to snap. Desideria hesitated, glancing at the empty horizon as if it might spontaneously produce their missing captain. Captured, she admitted. The word tasted like ash in her mouth, but denying reality wouldn't make it any less real. Aliens got him, probably treating him to their version of hospitality. Jorvax's eyes widened. How did that happen? Same way everything does, Desideria replied with a sigh. Bad timing, worse luck, and a healthy dose of stupidity. Desideria had half a mind to mount a rescue, but there was a niggling voice in her head, reminding her that they had neither the resources nor the manpower. Thorn was resourceful, sure, but he was still human, and that meant vulnerable in a galaxy that seemed hell-bent on erasing humanity altogether. She could almost hear Thorn's voice, telling her not to do anything stupid. Easier said than done, considering their situation had stupid written all over it in big neon letters. Jorvax tugged at his collar, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. So, what's the plan? Plan A was don't get caught, Desideria said. We're currently improvising Plan B, which incidentally is also don't get caught. You're a regular strategic genius, Jorvax quipped, dry as a desert. Desideria shot him a look. It's either that or start a cult. I hear they're all the rage these days. Humanity, always with the silver linings, Jorvax muttered, his antennae twitching with what might have been amusement or anxiety. It was hard to tell with him. They trudged through the outpost, the ground crunching beneath their boots. Desideria's scanner beeped sporadically, as if it too were questioning the point of their existence. Smoke curled lazily from the remains of the Galactic Archive in the distance, a grim reminder of their recent escape and the chaos they'd left behind. Do you think Thorn's okay? Jorvax asked, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. Desideria paused, staring into the distance. I hope so. He's resilient. We'll get him back. It was a promise she intended to keep, one way or another. Jorvax nodded, though doubt still lingered in his expression. You're not thinking of taking on the entire alien fleet by yourself, are you? Not unless I sprouted a hero complex overnight, Desideria replied. No, we need a plan. One that doesn't involve getting obliterated in the first 30 seconds. Jorvax tapped into the holographic display on his wrist, pulling up the fragmented data they'd salvaged. This is a start, at least. We know where they're holding him. Problem is, it's in the middle of their main base, which means getting in's going to be like threading a needle with a sledgehammer, Desideria said. Perfect, they reached what could generously be called a shelter, a ramshackle construct made from the remains of old ships in pure desperation. Desideria pushed open the creaky door, half expecting it to fall off its hinges. Inside, Grix was hunched over a console, his fingers flying across the keys like they were on fire. Well, isn't this a charming little hidey hole, he said without looking up. What's next on the agenda? Afternoon tea with the alien invaders, something like that, Desideria said, dropping into a chair that sagged under her weight. Got any bright ideas other than running and hiding until this all blows over? Grix asked, his tone as sarcastic as ever. Not yet, but I'm working on it. Glad to see optimism is contagious, Jorvax said, settling into a chair next to Grix. Desideria leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. We can't just sit around waiting for them to find us. Thorn's counting on us, and against all odds, so am I, Jorvax added, his expression serious for once. Grix shot him a sideways glance. Don't worry, we'll come up with something. We always do. It's just a matter of not dying in the process. Ah, the old don't die horribly plan, Desideria said with a wry smile. My favorite. They spent the next few hours poring over the data, trying to piece together a plan that didn't end with them as intergalactic footnotes. The outpost was quiet, save for the occasional creak and groan of the wind against the metal structure, like the universe itself was sighing in defeat. Just when Desideria was beginning to think the silence was a blessing, the door burst open and Threx stumbled in, looking like he'd been through the ringer. His usual air of self-importance was slightly deflated, though he tried to recover it with a hasty stand-and-salute maneuver. Where the hell have you been? Desideria asked, her tone a mix of relief and exasperation. Reconnaissance, Threx replied, brushing some imaginary dust off his shoulder. And I bring good news. Please tell me you found a way to disable their defenses with a well-placed sneeze, Grix said. Threx smirked. Not quite, but I did find a few weak points in their security grid. We might be able to slip through if we time it just right. Desideria considered this, hope flickering to life like a match in the dark. It's a start, but we'll need a distraction. Something big enough to draw their attention away from us. Maybe we could plant some explosives in the archive ruins, Jorvax suggested. They are still searching for survivors there. Desideria nodded, her mind racing. And while they're busy with that, we slip in, grab Thorn, and get out before they realize they've been had. Grix leaned back, a grin stretching across his face. Sounds like a party. I'll bring the fireworks. Threx looked around the room, his expression skeptical. You really think this will work? Desideria shrugged. Honestly, no, but it's the best shot we've got. Unless you have a better idea. Threx didn't respond, which was answer enough. Desideria rose, determination burning in her chest. All right, let's get to it. We've got a captain to rescue and an alien invasion to thwart. Just another day at the office. They spent the rest of the day preparing, a flurry of activity in the small outpost. Desideria found herself grateful for the distraction. It was easier to focus on logistics than on the gnawing fear in her gut. As they set out into the night, the stars above seemed to mock their efforts, but Desideria couldn't help but smile. She'd always preferred long odds. They made victory that much sweeter. The walk to the archive ruins was tense, every sound magnified in the stillness. Desideria kept one hand on her blaster, the other clutching the detonator like a lifeline. Grix was in charge of setting the explosives, his fingers deft and sure as he placed the charges. This'll light up the night sky, he promised, a gleam in his eyes. Let's just hope it's the right kind of fireworks, Jorvax muttered, glancing nervously at the horizon. Desideria nodded, her mind already on the next step. Grix, you get back to the shelter and keep an eye on the scanners. Threx, you're with me. Jorvax, you're our backup. Backup as in swoop in and save the day or notify next of kin, Jorvax asked dryly. Let's aim for the first one, Desideria said, slapping him on the shoulder. Ready as I'll ever be, Jorvax replied, his expression resigned. They moved into position, each footstep measured and precise. Desideria's heart was beating a furious rhythm, her adrenaline spiking with every second that ticked by. She could almost hear Thorn's voice in her head, urging her on. All right, she whispered into her calm. Grix, light him up. There was a moment of silence, then the night exploded into light and sound as the charges went off. The ground shook beneath them, and Desideria felt a savage satisfaction as she imagined the chaos it must be causing. Go, 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 she ordered, sprinting towards the alien base with Threx at her side. The alarms blared as they approached, but Desideria was already ahead of them, her scarf covering her face to protect against the smoke. They slipped through the breach in the security grid, the gap just wide enough for them to pass. Inside, the base was a maze of corridors and closed doors, each one a potential death trap. Desideria moved quickly, her wrist scanner guiding them through the labyrinth. Thorn should be in the central holding cells, Threx whispered, his voice barely audible over the din. Desideria nodded, her focus narrowing. They were so close now, the thought of failure unbearable. As they reached the cells, Desideria felt a surge of relief at the sight of Thorn, looking a bit worse for wear but alive. His eyes met hers, and for a moment the universe seemed to right itself. About time you showed up, Thorn said, his voice hoarse but amused. Couldn't let you have all the fun, Desideria replied, working to free him from his restraints. Threx kept watch while Jorvax moved to help Desideria. We should hurry. It won't be long before they realize what's happened. Thorn staggered to his feet, shaking off the effects of his captivity. You know, I was starting to think you forgot about me. Not a chance, Desideria said, pulling him towards the exit. Let's get the hell out of here. They retraced their steps, the alarms blaring louder in their ears. Desideria was acutely aware of the time ticking away, each second bringing them closer to discovery. As they reached the breach, Threx stopped short, his expression one of disbelief. You did it. You actually pulled it off, Desideria grinned, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. What can I say? I'm full of surprises. They made it back to the outpost just as the sun began to rise, the sky painted with shades of red and orange. It was a new day, full of possibilities. Desideria couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't completely against them. Thorn clapped her on the shoulder, his smile genuine. Thanks for the rescue. Don't mention it, Desideria said, her heart light despite everything. You'd do the same for me. Jorvax looked at the horizon, a thoughtful expression on his face. So what now? Desideria replied, her eyes gleaming with determination. Now we plan our next move. We're not done yet. They settled into the outpost, the weight of their situation still heavy but tempered by hope. Desideria knew they had a long way to go, but for the first time in a while, she felt like they were moving in the right direction. As the sun rose higher, casting its light over the desolate landscape, Desideria allowed herself. Desideria leaned back in her chair, eyeing the flickering holographic display like it was a particularly untrustworthy used car salesman. Well, this is a fine mess we've got ourselves into, isn't it? Mess of the year, if you ask me, Jorvax replied, his fingers dancing nervously over his wrist scanner. And considering the year we've had, that's saying something. Grix, who seemed to have a permanent residence in the outpost's lone comfy chair, snorted. If we survive this, I'm getting out of the saving the universe business and opening a bakery. You know where the cakes aren't trying to eat you. Threx, ever the picture of misplaced self-importance, stood by the door, glancing out as if expecting the universe to throw another curveball their way. Why a bakery? Well, Threx, it's either that or a bar. But I've seen enough of the latter to know it's full of lousy tips and worse company. Desideria shook her head, trying to focus her thoughts. We're missing something. We've got all this data from the archive, but it's like trying to put a puzzle together when half the pieces are missing. Well, maybe it's not the pieces but the picture we've got wrong, Jorvax suggested, squinting at the holographic display. What if there's something we haven't considered? Like what? A secret button that says press here to win the war, Desideria said, rolling her eyes. Not exactly, Jorvax said, frowning at the screen, but look at this sequence. It's old, really old. I think it might be an ancient human algorithm. Desideria leaned forward, interest piqued. How ancient are we talking? Ancient like when computers filled rooms, kind of ancient, Jorvax replied, his voice edged with excitement. You know, back when people still thought the Earth was flat and gravity was just a suggestion. Great, so we're relying on the digital equivalent of a caveman's sketch to save our skins, Threx muttered, unimpressed. Hey, it's better than nothing, Desideria shot back. If there's a chance it could help, we can't afford to ignore it. Jorvax nodded, his fingers flying across the scanner. I'll try to decrypt it. If we're lucky or just not completely cursed, it could be something useful. Just try not to blow us up in the process, Grix commented, his voice dry as the outpost's air supply. Right, Jorvax said, his face a mixture of concentration and mild dread. No blowing up, got it. While Jorvax worked his magic, or at least some passable sleight of hand, Desideria turned her attention back to the data they'd collected. There had to be something in there worth its weight in oxygen, something that wouldn't just make for a nice story at the retirement home. Hours ticked by, the kind where you start considering selling your soul for a decent cup of coffee. The outpost was silent save for the soft hum of the equipment and the occasional muttered curse from Jorvax. Finally, he let out a triumphant, if slightly exhausted noise. I've got it. I think I've really got it this time. Got what? Desideria asked, leaning in. It looks like a blueprint, Jorvax said, eyes wide with something that might have been hope. An ancient human weapon buried somewhere in the old archives. A weapon? Threx echoed, his interest suddenly piqued. That sounds promising. If you can find it, Grix said, ever the realist. This place is a cosmic landfall. Remember, Desideria considered the possibility, the weight of their recent victory against the alien base still fresh in her mind. If we can find that weapon and it's still functional, it could turn the tide for us, or it could just blow up in our faces, Grix pointed out. Well, that's the beauty of desperate measures, Desideria replied. They're bound to either save you or kill you. Either way, the suspense is over. The whole crew gathered around Jorvax's display, eyes glued to the rotating blueprint, their collective fates tied to a piece of technology older than their grandparents' bedtime stories. We've got to figure out how to send this information out, Jorvax said, his voice a mix of determination and the usual undercurrent of anxiety. An encoded distress signal, maybe, sounds like a plan, Desideria said, nodding, but it needs to be something they'll actually pay attention to and not just dismiss as cosmic spam. Threx turned on his heel, heading for the terminal. Leave it to me. I can sweet-talk a comm system like you wouldn't believe. I'd pay to see that, Grix said with a smirk. Only if there's popcorn, Desideria added. Threx settled in, fingers tapping an erratic rhythm on the terminal as he worked to encode the signal. I've got them lined up. All I need now is something to tag it with to make them notice. Try adding a little help us before we're reduced to space dust, Desideria suggested, deadpan. Right, I'll get right on making it sound urgent, Threx replied, rolling his eyes. The minutes stretched long and thin, a taut wire of anticipation and doubt. Desideria could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a bad hangover. Signal sent, Threx announced, leaning back with a satisfied grin. Now we wait and see if anyone's listening. Let's hope they're not all out to lunch, Jorvax said, his voice betraying more hope than he probably felt. Grix yawned, stretching in his chair. If the universe had a sense of humor, it'd be a dark one. Desideria nodded, her mind already turning over possibilities, scenarios, and a dozen other things that could go wrong. We've got to be ready for anything. If this doesn't work, we'll need a plan B. And probably C, D, and E for good measure. Already on it, Jorvax said, though his eyes were still glued to the scanner as if willing it to give them some good news. Hours dragged by, and with them the last vestiges of the night. The stars blinked out one by one, replaced by the harsh light of reality. It was a new day, a new chance for everything to either go right or spectacularly wrong. Desideria stood, stretching her stiff muscles and trying to shake off the creeping sense of doom that seemed to linger in the corners of the outpost. Let's go over the plan again, make sure we're all on the same page. Find the weapon, Threx said, ticking off the steps on his fingers. Hope it's not a dud. Figure out how to use it without it backfiring and taking us with it. and pray someone heard our signal and gives enough of a damn to help, Grix added. Right, Desideria said, nodding. In that order, Jorvax looked up from his scanner, a rare smile tugging at his lips. I think I found something, he said, a note of excitement in his voice. Desideria felt a flicker of hope, a fragile thing but enough to keep her going. What is it? It's a location, Jorvax said, gesturing to the holographic display. A part of the archives we haven't explored yet. It might hold the weapon. Desideria let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. All right, let's gear up. We've got a good old-fashioned treasure hunt on our hands. Grix stood, stretching his arms above his head. I've always wanted to play space pirate. Great, Desideria said, her voice laced with sarcasm. You can be the one to wear the ridiculous hat, only if you promise to call me Captain Grix. He shot back with a grin. Fine, Desideria said, rolling her eyes. Captain Grix, get your ass in gear and let's move. They suited up, the familiar weight of their gear a welcome comfort against the uncertainty ahead. Desideria felt the familiar thrill of adrenaline, the kind that made her feel alive even when everything else was trying to make her very much the opposite. They set out into the remains of the archive, the ghost of their previous mission still whispering in their ears. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and ash, the landscape a twisted homage to humanity's less-than-stellar track record. Keep your eyes peeled, Desideria instructed, her voice a low murmur against the silence. We don't want any surprises. Surprises are overrated, Jorvax agreed, his eyes scanning the horizon. The deeper they went, the more the ruins seemed to close in around them like the maw of some ancient beast. Desideria felt a tremor of unease, knowing that one wrong turn could spell disaster. At last, they reached the section of the archives Jorvax had pinpointed, a place untouched by the chaos that had consumed the rest. It was silent, too silent, and Desideria felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Here, Threx asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jorvax nodded, pointing to a door half buried under rubble. If the data's right, it's in there. Grix moved forward, examining the door with a frown. Looks like we've got some heavy lifting to do. Great, Desideria said, eyeing the obstruction. Manual labor. Just what I needed today. They set to work, their combined strength making slow but steady progress. Desideria's muscles burned with the effort, but she pushed through, driven by the promise of what lay beyond. When they finally cleared the way, Desideria stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow. Let's see what's hiding in there. The door creaked open with a groan, revealing a chamber untouched by time or the ravages of war. In the center stood a device that looked like it belonged in a museum, a relic of a bygone era. Is that it? Threx asked, a note of skepticism in his voice. It's got to be, Jorvax said, stepping inside to examine it. It matches the blueprint exactly. Desideria approached, her heart pounding with anticipation. Let's hope it still works. Hope, Grix echoed, a wry smile on his lips. There's a word I haven't heard in a while. Yeah, well, don't get too used to it, Desideria replied, her mind already racing ahead to what they'd need to do next. Jorvax studied the device, his fingers running over the controls with a reverence usually reserved for religious relics. It's got power, he said, his voice tinged with awe. I think we can make it work. Desideria felt a surge of adrenaline, the familiar thrill of a plan coming together. Then let's do it. We've got a universe to save. As they worked to bring the ancient weapon online, Desideria felt a glimmer of hope, a rare thing in their bleak reality. Maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide and prove that humanity wasn't finished yet. And if not, well, at least they'd go down swinging. The galactic outpost, where hope went to suffocate, was as silent as the grave. Desideria, feeling every bit the grim reaper of bad decisions, stood with the ancient weapon in her hands. It hummed with a potential that could either save their skins or peel it right off their bones. It was anyone's guess, really. Think this thing runs on double A's, Grix quipped, poking at it like a kid with a newfound frog. If it does, we're screwed, Jorvax replied, his voice a shaky cocktail of nerves and caffeine withdrawal. I doubt the local convenience store stocks those. Threx, standing sentinel by the door like a self-appointed prophet of doom, cast a skeptical glance over the relic. And we're sure it's not just a glorified flashlight. Wouldn't that just be our luck? Desideria muttered, aiming for sarcasm but landing closer to a weary resignation. We finally find an ancient weapon, and it's good for illuminating dark corridors. The outpost's holographic displays flickered like a nervous tick, adding to the ambience of a place where dreams came to die. Desideria ran her fingers over the device's controls, hoping for magic but expecting sparks. We have to assume this thing can do what it's meant to, Jorvax said, almost to convince himself. If not, we're one step closer to becoming alien lawn ornaments. I don't know, Grix said, feigning contemplation. I've always wanted to travel, and being abducted has a certain appeal. Keep dreaming, Captain Grix, Desideria shot back, the title heavy with jest. But first, let's see if we can make some fireworks. The silence stretched, a tense companion to their anxious breaths. Then the wrist scanner on Jorvax's arm chirped, a high-pitched interruption that was either the sound of imminent salvation or their impending doom. "Signal's been picked up," Jorvax announced, his voice a mix of relief and terror. "Fantastic," Threx said, not trying very hard to hide his sarcasm. "Let's just hope they're the friendly type." "I'm fresh out of white flags." Desideria moved to the central terminal, fingers flying over its surface. "Let's see if we've got friends or just more people to disappoint." "Go team," Grix deadpanned, settling into the lone comfy chair like a man prepared to ride his ship to the bottom of the cosmic ocean. The terminal's screen filled with static, the universe's way of flipping them the bird. But then through the fuzz, a voice cut through, a voice familiar and cracked with age, like the pages of a well-thumbed book. "This is Admiral Voss of the Reclamation Fleet," boomed the voice. Authority dripped like oil from a leaking engine. "Receiving your distress signal." Desideria exchanged a glance with Jorvax, who shrugged. "Well, at least they're human, Admiral Voss." Desideria spoke into the terminal, her tone even and professional, as if she wasn't holding a relic capable of turning them into crispy critters. "We're in dire need of some backup. Got a bit of an alien problem heading our way." "Figures," Voss replied, the sound of his voice crackling like a campfire. "We'll swing by and see if we can't rain on their parade." The weight of the moment pressed down on Desideria, a gavel of fate that could fall either way. Still, hope was a stubborn ember refusing to be snuffed out. "Guess all that sweet talking on the comms paid off," Threx said, his smirk just this side of annoying. "If it works, I'll buy you a drink," Desideria promised, the thought of a strong drink not entirely unwelcome. Grix stretched, his body a symphony of creaking joints. "I'll take a rain check on that drink. I've got a feeling we'll need all hands sober." The outpost shuddered, a gentle reminder from the universe that things were about to get interesting. Desideria gripped the ancient weapon tighter, trying to ignore the way it seemed to pulse in her hands. "Time to see if this thing's more than just a glorified paperweight," she said, her voice buoyed by determination and just a hint of madness. The team moved in unison, a well-oiled machine that had seen its fair share of wear and tear. They made their way outside, the harsh light of the alien sun casting long shadows over the barren landscape. "Lovely weather for a battle," Grix commented, his eyes scanning the horizon. "All we're missing is a picnic basket. I hope you packed sandwiches," Jorvax said, his tone hovering between humor and hysteria. The ground beneath them quaked, a distant rumble that heralded the arrival of their unwelcome guests. Alien ships broke through the clouds, their sleek forms a testament to the universe's cruel sense of style. Desideria's heart beat a staccato rhythm, her palms slick with sweat. "All right, people, let's give them a welcome they won't forget." The alien armada grew closer, a swarm of metallic locusts ready to devour the last remnants of humanity. But Desideria and her team stood their ground, each second an eternity before the storm. "Brace yourselves," Threx called out, gripping his weapon like a lifeline. "This is going to be one hell of a ride." The alien ships let loose a barrage, their weapons lighting up the sky like fireworks on a doomed New Year's Eve. Desideria felt the ground shake as explosions rocked the outpost, the noise a cacophony that threatened to drown out rational thought. "Now would be a good time to use that thing," Grix suggested, his voice steadier than his shaking hands would suggest. Desideria took a deep breath, her fingers dancing over the ancient weapon's controls. "Let's see what you've got, old friend," she murmured, as if coaxing a temperamental pet. As if in answer, the device whirred to life, its energy surging through Desideria like a jolt of caffeine. The air crackled with potential, the weapon's hum rising to a crescendo that matched the beating of her heart. Then, with a sound that could only be described as a cosmic exhale, the weapon fired. A beam of light, brighter than a million suns, lanced out to meet the alien ships. It moved with a grace that belied its destructive power, slicing through the armada like a knife through butter. Desideria watched, awestruck and a little bit terrified, as the alien ships disintegrated in a burst of light. They fell from the sky in fiery arcs, a meteor shower of destruction that left nothing but ash and echoes. "Well, I'll be damned," Threx said, his voice hushed by the spectacle. It actually worked. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and triumph, a heady mix that made Desideria's blood sing. In the distance, the reclamation fleet ships emerged, their presence a promise of salvation and a reminder that humanity wasn't alone after all. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little help," Jorvax said, his voice tinged with relief. Desideria nodded, a smile tugging at her lips despite the exhaustion that weighed her down. "Better late than never," she said, knowing full well that timing had never been their strong suit. Admiral Voss's voice crackled over the comms, the triumph in his tone unmistakable. "Well done, team. We'll mop up the rest. You've earned yourselves a break." Grix let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "I think I'll take that drink now," he said, a grin stretching across his face. Desideria felt the tension ease from her shoulders, the burden of their struggle lifting if only for a moment. Make mine a double, she replied, the thought of a warm drink and a comfortable chair almost as intoxicating as their victory. The outpost stood as a testament to their resilience, a beacon of hope in a universe that seemed determined to snuff it out. But for now, they'd won. For now, they'd live to see another day. Nicely done, Captain Grix, Desideria said, the humor in her voice an old, familiar friend. Thank you, Commander, Grix replied, the title a badge of honor they'd all earned. As the reclamation fleet moved in to secure their victory, Desideria allowed herself a moment to breathe. They had fought, they had struggled, and against all odds they had won. The universe still spun, indifferent as ever, but for now, Desideria and her team had carved out their little corner of victory, and that was enough. At least until the next crisis. The dust settled in the wake of their unlikely victory, particles dancing lazily in the air like they had all the time in the world. Desideria stared at the smoldering remains of the alien ships, her heart still thumping like it had a grudge against her rib cage. They'd done it, somehow, against all odds which were stacked higher than a bureaucrat's to-do list. Grix leaned against the crumbling wall, taking a deep breath that sounded dangerously close to a death rattle. Well, he said, dragging the word out like a reluctant apology, that wasn't the worst Tuesday I've had. Jorvax chuckled, the sound more cough than laugh. Speak for yourself. I haven't felt this jittery since I drank 3 espressos back-to-back. One hell of a caffeine crash, Threx muttered, his skepticism replaced by the begrudging respect of a man who'd just seen a chicken execute a perfect triple axel. Desideria lifted the ancient weapon, feeling its weight like a judgment. It hummed softly, a smug reminder of the power they'd almost been crushed under. Nice to know this thing isn't just a fancy glow stick, she said, trying to sound casual as her grip visibly trembled. Yeah, well, Threx said, adjusting his stance as if the very ground might betray him, I was kind of looking forward to the glow stick theory. You know, minimal collateral damage. Grix snorted, a genuine laugh this time. Collateral damage. Thought that was your nickname, Threx. Threx gave him a withering look, the kind that could sire milk. Only when you're not around to do it yourself. Before the banter could devolve into the usual exchange of creative insults, Admiral Voss's voice crackled over the comms again, his tone dripping with the sort of weary authority that suggested babysitting was part of his job description. Desideria, I assume you're still in one piece. She tapped the comm unit, rolling her eyes. Barely, Admiral. Anything I can do for you, or was that just a wellness check? He chuckled, the sound like pebbles grinding together. Just confirming you haven't accidentally vaporized yourself. You know, standard procedure. Well, we're still here, Desideria replied, glancing at her motley crew. The outpost, on the other hand, might need a touch-up. Good to hear, Voss said, relief woven through his words like a hidden thread. We'll have repair teams inbound, and congratulations, you've made quite the impression, Desideria sighed. I just hope it was a good one. Otherwise, we're gonna need a bigger apology letter. Voss chuckled again. I'd say saving lives is a pretty solid opener. We'll handle the rest. The comm went silent, leaving Desideria to the aftermath of their unexpected triumph. The outpost, once a silent graveyard of dreams, now bore striking scars from their battle, each mark a reluctant celebration of survival. Jorvax peered at his wrist scanner, the device chirping with activity like an overexcited puppy. Signals are coming in from all over the sector. Looks like everyone's keen to weigh in. Desideria arched an eyebrow. And what's the verdict? We heroes or villains this time? Heroes mostly, Jorvax replied, grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery and found a hidden stash of chocolate all in one day. A few dissenters, but hey, can't please everyone. That's the spirit, Threx said, crossing his arms. Let's make sure they remember not to mess with the crazy species who turned an alien fleet into space confetti. Grix, still lounging like a cat in the dilapidated comfy chair, nodded. We'll have a reputation as intergalactic badasses. Might even get a discount at the local dive bar. Desideria chuckled, the sound as much a release as it was amusement. About time we got some perks. I'm tired of paying full price for misery. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the ragged outpost, their victory bittersweet. Desideria knew the cost of survival, could feel it in the ache of her bones and the weight of her conscience. She turned to her crew, her voice steady despite the tumult within. We need to make sure this never happens again. We've had our brush with annihilation, and I'd rather not make it a habit. Agreed, Threx said, nodding. Next time, let's be the ones with the bigger stick from the start. Grix grinned, the kind of grin that suggested he'd already thought of a dozen more bad jokes, and maybe a few more comfy chairs while we're at it. Jorvax smirked, tapping at his wrist scanner. We'll start a trend. Galactic-wide comfy chair distribution. Desideria laughed, the sound surprising even herself. It felt good, like finding a forgotten candy in your pocket. Let's make it a priority, right after we make sure no one else gets the bright idea to pick a fight with us. The reclamation fleet ships loomed above them, a silent promise of protection and the kind of backup that usually arrived too late. But for now, it was there and that was enough. We're gonna have to clean this place up, Threx said, surveying the wreckage with an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. That's what repair teams are for, Desideria replied, already feeling the fatigue setting in. Let them deal with it. We've got bigger fish to fry. Grix's eyes twinkled with mischief. Like figuring out how to work this thing without blowing ourselves up next time? Exactly, she said. And maybe upgrading our coffee supplies while we're at it. Can't have Jorvax twitching like a squirrel on speed again. Jorvax held up his hands in mock surrender, guilty as charged. Just don't ask me to give up my caffeine entirely, or things might get ugly. They settled into a comfortable silence, the kind born of shared danger and mutual respect. Desideria knew they'd been lucky, that their survival was as much a fluke as it was a result of their skill. But that didn't mean she'd rely on luck next time. The comm crackled again, Voss's voice cutting through the quiet like a well-aimed laser. Desideria, once things are stable, I'd like a full report. Command wants to hear all about your little escapade. Of course, she replied, rolling her eyes. Should I be worried? Only if you're planning on writing it like a romance novel, Voss replied, his tone dry as a desert. Just stick to the facts if you can. Don't worry, she said, smirking at her crew. We'll keep the embellishments to a minimum. Maybe the comm line died, leaving them alone with their thoughts once more. Desideria glanced at her team, feeling a surge of pride. They'd come through against all odds, and now they had a chance to make things right. Let's get to work, she said, her voice firm. We've got a universe to remind who's in charge. Threx gave a mock salute, his expression one of grudging admiration. Lead the way, fearless leader. Grix nodded, getting to his feet with a groan of protest. And maybe we'll get that drink afterward, he said, hope threading through his words. Count on it, Desideria replied, her smile genuine if a little weary. We've earned it. As they began the long, slow process of reclaiming the outpost and securing their future, Desideria felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. It was a fragile, tentative thing, easily crushed under the weight of reality, but it was there and it was enough to keep her going. The universe was vast, indifferent, and utterly unpredictable, but they'd shown it what they were capable of. And now perhaps it would think twice before trying to snuff them out. Desideria turned her gaze to the horizon, a determined glint in her eyes. They'd survived this time and they'd do it again. Whatever it took, she'd make sure humanity endured, and maybe, just maybe, they'd thrive. Let's make sure they remember us, she said, her voice carrying on the wind like a promise. And with that they set to work, their spirits as indomitable as the stars above. The future was uncertain, the path ahead fraught with danger and doubt, but they were ready, they were human, and that was enough.